The morning arrived with the familiar golden light that filtered through the dense canopy of pines. A fine mist hovered just above the forest floor, giving the landscape an ethereal quality that never failed to take the ranger's breath away, even after 18 years of waking to this same view. The national park that stretched across this remote corner of the Pacific Northwest had been his sanctuary, his workplace, and his purpose for nearly 2 decades now. At 47, the ranger carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who understood the land intimately. His weathered face, creased at the corners of his eyes from years of squinting against both summer sun and winter snow, told stories of countless patrols, rescues, and quiet moments of communion with the wilderness. The badge on his olive-green uniform caught the morning light as he moved about his modest ranger station, preparing for what should have been a routine day checking the eastern trails. He poured himself a cup of coffee into the same dented metal mug he'd carried since his first year on the job, a gift from his daughter when she was just 7 years old. She was in college now, studying environmental science, following in his footsteps but in her own way. The thought brought a slight smile to his face as he stepped onto the wooden porch of the station, listening to the chorus of birdsong that typically accompanied sunrise. Except this morning the chorus seemed incomplete. The ranger paused, the steam from his coffee rising in lazy spirals as he tilted his head, listening more intently. The jays were oddly quiet today. In 18 years he'd learned to read the forest like others read the morning news, and something in today's edition wasn't quite right. The evening before, he'd called home, speaking to his wife about their weekend plans. She wanted him to consider the early retirement package the Park Service had offered. "We could travel," she'd suggested, her voice warm with possibility. "See some of those places we've always talked about." He hadn't given her an answer. The truth was, he couldn't imagine himself anywhere but here, among these ancient trees that had become more familiar to him than the suburban streets of his childhood. As he climbed into his service vehicle, a mud-spattered green pickup with the park's emblem on the doors, he noticed the weather report on his dashboard tablet forecasting clear skies. Yet the air had a heaviness to it that contradicted the bright blue overhead, the kind of stillness that typically preceded a storm. His instincts, honed through years of reading nature's subtle signs, whispered caution. The eastern section needed checking after last week's unexpected rainfall had likely washed out portions of the hiking trail. Routine maintenance, the kind of work that formed the backbone of his duties. Preserve, protect, and maintain. Straightforward, predictable work that he found deeply satisfying. He entered the coordinates into his GPS, though he hardly needed it. Every bend in these service roads was mapped in his memory. The truck rumbled along the unpaved road, suspension groaning over ruts and exposed roots. Through the open window, the ranger inhaled deeply, drawing in the scent of pine resin, damp earth, and something else. Something metallic and unfamiliar. He frowned slightly but continued driving, making mental notes of fallen branches that would need clearing and areas where the underbrush was encroaching on the trail markers. The radio crackled occasionally with routine communications from other rangers patrolling different sectors. The usual updates, a campsite that needed checking after reports of improper food storage, hikers requesting information about trail conditions, a reminder about the upcoming staff meeting to discuss summer fire prevention protocols, the ordinary rhythm of a day in the Park Service. Yet as he ventured deeper into the eastern sector, the ranger noticed the wildlife growing increasingly scarce. Typically, deer would be visible in the meadow clearings at this hour, and squirrels would dart across the service road ahead of his vehicle. Today, he'd seen neither. The forest seemed to be holding its breath, and a prickle of unease traveled up his spine, the same sensation he'd experienced before finding that lost hiker 3 winters ago, or before the unexpected flash flood of 2018. He pulled the truck to a stop at the designated trailhead and switched off the engine. The sudden silence was jarring. No distant woodpecker, no rustling in the underbrush, no insect hum, just the occasional creaking of branches in the light breeze and the ticking of his cooling engine. "Something's not right," he murmured to himself, reaching for his pack and equipment belt. Years ago, newer rangers would sometimes tease him about his forest intuition, but those same rangers had learned to trust his hunches when they repeatedly proved accurate. The standard equipment went on with practiced efficiency. First aid kit, multi-tool, GPS device, radio, water canteen, field notebook. He added his camera as an afterthought. He'd been meaning to document some of the trail erosion for his monthly report anyway. The trail itself was, as he expected, partially washed out in sections where the rainfall had carved new channels down the slope. He made notes, took photographs, and marked areas that would require a maintenance crew. All routine, all familiar, yet the silence of the forest continued to nag at him, a persistent wrong note in an otherwise ordinary day. 2 hours into his patrol, the ranger paused at a ridge overlooking a valley he'd traversed hundreds of times before. From this vantage point, he could see the pattern of the land, the natural flow of water, the gradual succession of plant species as elevation changed, the game trails barely visible among the underbrush. His trained eye noticed immediately that something was different, a subtle alteration in the landscape below. Near the base of the opposite slope, approximately half a mile away, the vegetation pattern showed an irregularity. A section of younger growth amid the mature forest, forming an almost perfect rectangle, too perfect to be natural. In 18 years of patrolling this sector, he had never noticed this anomaly before, and the ranger prided himself on his attention to detail. His radio crackled, breaking the silence. The dispatcher's voice came through, asking for a routine position check. The ranger responded automatically, giving his coordinates and status, but his eyes never left that rectangular patch of younger trees on the opposite slope. "All routine here," he reported, a slight hesitation in his voice. "Just checking trail erosion. Should be back at station by 1600. He could report the anomaly, he thought. Protocol would dictate a formal investigation, paperwork, possibly a team deployment. But something, curiosity, instinct, or perhaps just years of self-reliance, made him decide to check it himself first. After all, it was probably nothing more than an old research plot, or perhaps a section replanted after a lightning strike had taken out the original growth. The ranger adjusted his pack and began descending toward the valley floor, his boots finding secure footing on the slippery trail with practiced ease. As he hiked, he continued to note the unnatural quiet of the forest, the absence of wildlife, the lingering metallic scent that seemed to grow stronger as he approached the valley. 18 years in these woods had taught him many things, but perhaps the most important was that the forest always had secrets. Most were beautiful, hidden waterfalls, rare flower species, the occasional glimpse of an endangered bird. But some secrets, he knew, were of a different nature entirely. And as he made his way toward that too-perfect rectangle of young growth, the ranger couldn't shake the feeling that he was about to uncover one of those darker mysteries, the kind that changed everything that came after. The ranger approached the rectangular area of younger growth with measured steps, his senses heightened. The forest floor beneath his boots had changed subtly, more compact somehow, as though it had been disturbed and then deliberately restored. The pattern of moss and undergrowth wasn't quite right. It looked staged rather than naturally occurring. 18 years of daily observation had made such discrepancies obvious to his trained eye. He paused at the perimeter of the rectangular area, crouching down to examine the soil. Removing his glove, he ran his fingers through the loose earth, noting its texture and composition. It was different from the surrounding forest floor, less integrated with organic matter, almost as if it had been brought in from elsewhere. The ranger's heartbeat quickened slightly. This wasn't a research plot or natural regrowth after a lightning strike. This was deliberately altered terrain. Standing again, he surveyed the younger trees. They were the right species for this elevation, western hemlock and Douglas fir, but their spacing was too uniform, their size too consistent. Someone had planted these trees, and not with conservation in mind. They had been planted to conceal something. The metallic scent that had nagged at him all morning was stronger here, mingling with the earthy aroma of the forest in a discordant combination. The ranger circled the perimeter of the rectangular area, looking for any signs of recent activity. Near the northwestern corner, he found what he was looking for, a barely perceptible depression in the ground, roughly 3 feet in diameter, where the soil had settled slightly more than the surrounding area. Kneeling beside this depression, the ranger brushed away the carefully arranged layer of pine needles and forest debris. His fingers met something solid and distinctly non-organic. Heart now pounding against his ribs, he cleared more of the camouflaging material away, revealing the edge of what appeared to be a metal hatch, its surface painted in a mottled pattern to mimic forest floor coloration. "What the hell?" he muttered, his voice sounding unnaturally loud in the silent forest. The ranger sat back on his heels, mind racing. In his nearly 2 decades of service, he'd encountered many strange things. Illegal hunting blinds, abandoned research equipment, even the occasional marijuana cultivation operation. But this, a carefully concealed metal hatch in one of the most remote sections of the park, was unprecedented. His first instinct was to radio it in immediately. This was potentially a serious security issue, possibly even a matter for Homeland Security. But a deeper instinct, the same one that had guided him to this spot, urged caution. Without more information, he couldn't be certain what he was dealing with. The ranger took out his camera and methodically documented the site, taking multiple photographs of the hatch and its surroundings from various angles. He noted the GPS coordinates in his field notebook, sketching a quick map of the location relative to known landmarks. Training and protocol provided a framework for his actions, keeping the rising tide of adrenaline and curiosity in check. After completing his documentation, he turned his attention back to the hatch itself. There was no visible handle or opening mechanism, just the smooth, camouflaged metal surface. He ran his hands along the perimeter, feeling for any indentation or mechanism. Near what he guessed was the top of the hatch, his fingers detected a slight recess. Applying pressure, he felt something give way slightly. There was a soft hiss, like air being released from a pressurized container, and the hatch shifted upward by about an inch. The ranger jerked his hand back instinctively, his heart hammering in his chest. The hatch had been sealed, possibly for years, yet whatever mechanism operated, it was still functional. His mouth dry, the ranger considered his options. Park Service protocol was clear. Unknown structures should be reported and secured pending investigation by appropriate authorities. The rational part of his brain urged him to back away, radio for backup, and wait for a proper team to arrive. But 18 years of self-reliance in the wilderness had also taught him the value of first-hand information. Whatever this bunker contained might require immediate attention, and if it turned out to be nothing significant, he'd have saved the Park Service the embarrassment and expense of a full-scale deployment. Decision made, the ranger took a deep breath and pressed more firmly on the recess he discovered. With a mechanical whir that seemed deafening in the forest silence, the hatch lifted further, revealing a dark opening and the top of what appeared to be a metal ladder descending into blackness. The smell that emerged was stale and chemical, a combination of old concrete, metal, and something else he couldn't quite identify. The ranger's training kicked in automatically. He pulled his emergency flashlight from his belt and directed its beam into the opening. The light revealed a concrete shaft extending downward approximately 15 feet to a floor below. His pulse pounded in his ears as he swept the flashlight beam around the visible portion of the underground structure. The walls of the shaft were smooth concrete, discolored with age but showing no significant deterioration. The ladder was steel, anchored firmly to the wall, with rungs that showed minimal rusting. This was no hastily constructed hideout or temporary facility. This was a permanent installation, built to last and deliberately concealed. The ranger's mind raced through possibilities. Cold War-era government bunker? Private doomsday shelter? Something connected to the military testing grounds that had existed in parts of the state during the mid-20th century? None of these explanations seemed entirely satisfactory given the location and the apparent effort at concealment. He should back away now, he knew. Secure the site, radio it in, wait for the proper authorities. That was the procedure, the safe option. But the same curiosity that had drawn him to this profession in the first place kept him frozen at the edge of the opening, flashlight beam probing the darkness below. Making another quick decision, the ranger secured his pack and equipment, ensuring nothing would snag during a descent. He tested the ladder with his weight, finding it sturdy despite its age. With one last glance at the silent forest around him, he began to climb down into the darkness, the flashlight clenched between his teeth, illuminating each rung as he descended. The air grew cooler and denser as he made his way down, the forest sounds fading entirely, replaced by the echo of his boots against metal and the sound of his own carefully controlled breathing. At the bottom, his flashlight revealed a narrow corridor extending in two directions. The walls were bare concrete, the floor dusty but otherwise clear of debris. Along the ceiling ran bundles of cables and pipes, some of which appeared to be still intact. The ranger stood motionless for a moment, allowing his eyes to adjust to the dimness and his mind to process what he was seeing. This was no simple bunker or shelter. The scale and construction suggested something far more complex, a facility of some kind, buried beneath the forest he'd patrolled for almost 2 decades without any inkling of its existence. A sign on the wall caught his attention, its text faded but still legible. Section A7, with an arrow pointing to the right. Below it, in smaller text, Authorized personnel only. The ranger's throat tightened. Whatever this place was, it was official, organized, and deliberately hidden from public knowledge. He'd stumbled upon something significant, something that, judging by the effort at concealment and the apparent age of the facility, was never meant to be found. With his heart thundering in his chest and every instinct heightened to painful acuity, the ranger turned his flashlight toward the corridor indicated by the arrow. Whatever secrets this underground facility held, he was about to discover them, and somewhere in the back of his mind, a quiet voice warned that after this moment, nothing in his carefully ordered world would ever be quite the same again. The ranger moved cautiously down the corridor, his flashlight beam creating elongated shadows that seemed to dance across the concrete walls. The air was stagnant, thick with dust, and the lingering chemical smell he couldn't identify. Each footstep echoed softly, a reminder of how deep underground he had ventured. According to his mental calculations, he was now directly beneath the rectangular patch of younger trees he'd observed from the ridge. The corridor extended approximately 50 feet before terminating at a heavy metal door. Unlike the hatch above, this door featured clear markings, a faded yellow and black hazard stripe pattern around its frame, and a numerical keypad mounted on the adjacent wall. Above the keypad, a small red light glowed steadily. Remarkably, whatever power system this facility used was still functioning after what must have been decades of abandonment. The ranger hesitated before the door, suddenly acutely aware of his isolation. No one knew where he was. If something happened to him here, it might be days before anyone began searching, and they would have no reason to look beneath the forest floor. The thought sent a chill through him that had nothing to do with the cool underground air. He examined the keypad without touching it. The technology looked outdated, probably from the 1980s based on the design. Below it was a small metal plate with engraved text, "Clearance Level B required." Further confirmation that this was no ordinary bunker, but a classified facility of some kind. The ranger documented everything meticulously with his camera, capturing images of the door, the keypad, and the warning signs. He needed evidence before reporting this discovery, concrete proof of what lay beneath his forest. Stepping back from the door, he noticed something he'd overlooked, a small ventilation grate near floor level, its cover hanging loose on one rusted screw. Crouching down, he directed his flashlight through the opening. Beyond the grate was what appeared to be a larger room, dimly lit by emergency lighting that cast a sickly green glow across banks of equipment. The ranger carefully removed the loose grate, creating an opening roughly 2 feet square. It would be a tight fit, but he could manage it. The voice of caution in his mind grew louder, warning against further exploration without backup. But the professional part of him argued that he needed more information before calling in a discovery of this magnitude. What exactly was he reporting? A military installation? A scientific research facility? Something else entirely? After a moment's hesitation, he squeezed through the opening, emerging into what appeared to be a control room of sorts. Banks of outdated computer equipment lined the walls, their displays dark and dusty. Filing cabinets stood in neat rows along the back wall, and a large table dominated the center of the room, its surface covered with what looked like maps and documents beneath a layer of dust. The ranger's flashlight beam revealed something else. A coffee mug sitting on one of the consoles, lipstick still visible on its rim. A clipboard lay beside it with a pen placed precisely across its surface, as though the owner had stepped away momentarily, intending to return. The scene suggested not gradual abandonment, but sudden evacuation, as if everyone working here had left in a hurry and never returned. Moving carefully to avoid disturbing anything, the ranger approached the central table. Brushing away some of the dust with his gloved hand, he revealed what appeared to be topographical maps of the surrounding region, marked with symbols and notations he didn't recognize. Beside these were typed documents stamped with "classified" in faded red ink. The dates visible on the papers were from the early 1970s. His camera continued to document everything: the control panels, the abandoned personal items, the classified documents. Whatever had happened here was decades old, but the facility itself had remained remarkably preserved, sealed away beneath the forest. In the corner of the room, a metal filing cabinet stood with one drawer partially open. The ranger approached it cautiously, directing his flashlight into the opening. Inside were more documents, but also something unexpected: a leather-bound journal with no official markings. Personal, then, rather than institutional. The ranger carefully extracted the journal, mindful of its potential fragility after decades in this sealed environment. The leather was still supple, protected from deterioration by the controlled atmosphere of the bunker. Opening it, he found pages of handwritten notes, the script tight and precise. The first entry was dated April 17, 1972. He photographed several pages before carefully returning the journal to exactly where he'd found it. His training emphasized the importance of preserving potential evidence, and everything in this facility might prove significant. The journal's existence suggested that whatever had occurred here had compelled at least one person to keep a personal record, something unofficial, outside the documented procedures of whatever organization had built this place. A doorway on the far side of the control room led deeper into the facility. The ranger hesitated once again, aware that he was already well beyond the boundaries of protocol. He should return to the surface now, report his findings, and let the appropriate authorities take over. Yet something compelled him forward, a sense that whatever lay beyond that doorway might provide the context needed to understand what he'd already discovered. The next room was smaller, its purpose not immediately clear. Metal shelving units lined the walls, holding cardboard boxes labeled with alphanumeric codes. The ranger approached one shelf, shining his light on the nearest box. The label read, A742, Biological Samples. His breath caught. Biological samples? What kind of research had been conducted here? He carefully lifted the lid of one box, revealing rows of glass vials secured in foam padding. Each vial contained what appeared to be soil samples, labeled with coordinates that, if he wasn't mistaken, corresponded to locations within the park. The dates on these samples matched those on the documents in the control room, early 1970s. Adjacent to the shelving units stood a stainless steel cabinet with a biohazard symbol prominently displayed on its doors. The ranger's unease deepened. His wildlife management training had included basic protocols for biological hazards, enough to recognize that whatever research had been conducted here potentially involved dangerous materials. He didn't open the biohazard cabinet. Some boundaries shouldn't be crossed without proper equipment and authorization. Instead, he photographed it carefully from multiple angles, making sure the warning symbols were clearly visible. This would be critical information for the hazardous materials team that would inevitably be dispatched once he reported his findings. The final doorway led to what appeared to be living quarters, a row of small rooms containing basic beds, desks, and personal storage. Unlike the control room and sample storage, these spaces showed signs of more thorough evacuation. No personal items remained visible, though the built-in furniture suggested this facility had been designed for extended occupation. The ranger checked his watch, alarmed to discover he'd been underground for nearly 2 hours. He needed to return to the surface and report his findings immediately. Whatever this facility was, its discovery would require involvement from multiple agencies. The Park Service would be just the beginning. As he made his way back through the control room toward the ventilation opening, something caught his eye that he'd missed initially. A framed photograph hanging on the wall near one of the computer stations. The glass was dusty, but the image beneath was still discernible. A group of men in lab coats, standing before what appeared to be the entrance to this very bunker, before it had been concealed. The forest in the background was younger, the trees not yet fully mature. The ranger photographed this final piece of evidence before squeezing back through the ventilation grate into the corridor. His mind raced as he retraced his steps to the ladder. The implications of what he'd discovered were enormous. A secret government facility hidden beneath protected parkland, conducting some kind of biological research involving samples collected from the surrounding forest, and then apparently abandoned in haste, leaving equipment, documents, and even personal items behind. Back at the surface, the ranger carefully secured the hatch, ensuring it appeared undisturbed to any casual observer. The forest around him seemed different now, knowing what lay beneath its peaceful surface. The secrets it had kept for decades weighed heavily on him as he hiked back toward the trail where he'd left his vehicle. Once back at his truck, the ranger retrieved his satellite phone, standard issue for rangers patrolling remote areas with poor radio reception. His hands trembled slightly as he dialed the number for the Regional Park Service headquarters. This went beyond his immediate supervisors. This required attention from the highest levels. "Regional Office, this is Supervisor Matthews," came the response after several rings. The ranger took a deep breath. "This is Ranger 47 Delta from Eastern District Station. I need to report a Code 5 Alpha discovery requiring immediate attention." A pause on the line. Code 5 Alpha was rarely used. It designated discovery of unauthorized structures or evidence of illegal activity within park boundaries that potentially posed environmental or security risks. Nature of the discovery? Matthews asked, his tone sharpening with professional interest. Underground facility, appears government-constructed, likely dating to the early 1970s. Evidence of biological research, possible hazardous materials, classified documents. The facility is extensive and appears to have been abandoned suddenly, but deliberately concealed. Another pause. Longer this time. Location. The ranger provided the GPS coordinates, adding, "The entrance is camouflaged. Without knowing what to look for, it would be nearly impossible to spot from ground level." "Have you entered the facility?" Matthews asked, a note of concern evident in his voice. The ranger hesitated only briefly. "Affirmative. Initial exploration to determine nature and extent. Documented with photographs. No materials removed." "Understood." Matthews's voice had taken on the careful neutrality that suggested he was already thinking about jurisdictional complications. "Return to your station immediately. Secure all documentation. Do not discuss this discovery with anyone. A team will be dispatched within the hour." "Sir," the ranger added, "given the nature of what I found, shouldn't we also notify—" "All appropriate agencies will be notified," Matthews interrupted. "My office will handle the protocols. Your responsibility now is to return to station and await further instructions. Is that clear?" "Yes, sir." The ranger ended the call, a sense of unease settling over him. The bureaucratic response had been predictable, but somehow unsatisfying. Something about Matthews's tone suggested this discovery might be buried in administrative procedures and jurisdictional disputes. He started the truck and began the drive back to his station, mind still processing everything he'd seen. The biological samples, the classified documents, the hastily abandoned personal effects, all pointed to something significant having occurred beneath this forest, something important enough to conceal but dangerous enough to evacuate. By the time he reached his station, the afternoon was waning. He downloaded the photographs from his camera to his secure work computer and compiled his notes into a formal report, as detailed and objective as possible. Protocol followed, evidence secured. But as evening approached with no sign of the promised response team, the ranger found himself increasingly restless. He checked his phone repeatedly for missed calls or messages, but there was nothing. Had Matthews even initiated the proper protocols? The discovery warranted an immediate response. Hazardous materials alone should have triggered emergency procedures. He paced the small confines of his station, reviewing mental images of what he'd found. The journal particularly nagged at him. What insights might those personal notes contain? What had really happened in that underground facility? And why had it been abandoned so suddenly, yet carefully preserved? As night fell over the forest, the ranger made a decision. If the official response was being delayed or diluted by bureaucratic caution, he would need more concrete evidence to force action. Tomorrow he would return to the bunker, this time better equipped, with proper protective gear from the station's emergency supplies. He would retrieve the journal and enough documentation to ensure this discovery couldn't be quietly filed away and forgotten. Whatever secrets lay beneath his forest, they had remained hidden for too long. Something had shocked the researchers enough to abandon their work and seal away all evidence. And now that same hidden truth waited in the darkness below, like a time capsule from the past with a message too important to ignore. The ranger set his alarm for before dawn. Tomorrow would bring answers, or at least better questions. And whatever he discovered, he would ensure it came to light, no matter what resistance he might face from those who preferred some secrets to remain buried. Sleep had proven elusive. The ranger rose before his alarm, the first hints of dawn barely visible through his bedroom window. His mind had raced throughout the night, replaying images of the underground facility, the abandoned control room, the biological samples, the journal he'd left behind. Most troubling was the continued silence from regional headquarters. No response team had arrived. No follow-up call from Supervisor Matthews. Nothing. After a quick shower and strong coffee, he pulled on civilian clothes rather than his uniform. Today's investigation would be unofficial, perhaps even against explicit orders, if Matthews had deliberately chosen inaction. The weight of this decision pressed on him. In 18 years, he had never knowingly violated protocol. But the facility's existence, and the regional office's apparent disinterest, left him no choice. The county records office opened at 8. Located in the small administrative center 30 miles from his station, It housed archives dating back to the region's earliest development. If the underground facility had been constructed legally, some documentation should exist: building permits, land use applications, environmental impact studies. If, as he suspected, it had been built clandestinely, perhaps newspaper archives might contain indirect references: unusual activity in the area, unexplained road construction, temporary influx of workers. The records clerk looked up from her computer as the ranger entered, the bell above the door announcing his arrival. Her gray hair was pulled into a tight bun, reading glasses perched on her nose. Recognition flickered across her face. In a community this small, the park ranger was a familiar figure, even out of uniform. "Morning," she said, removing her glasses. "Don't often see you in town on weekdays." "Research day," he replied with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Looking into some historical land use in the eastern sector of the park." "Any particular period?" "Early 70s, possibly late 60s. He kept his tone casual, as though this were routine research. "I'm interested in any construction, government projects, or unusual land use during that time." The clerk's eyebrows rose slightly. "That's specific. Any particular reason?" "Erosion patterns," he answered smoothly. "We're seeing some unusual water flow that suggests previous land disruption. Just trying to understand the historical context." She seemed to accept this explanation, nodding as she stood. "Most of that would be in the physical archives. Computers only go back to '86 in this office." She gestured toward a door behind her desk. "Follow me." The archive room smelled of dust and old paper, illuminated by flickering fluorescent lights that gave everything a sickly pallor. Metal shelving units extended from floor to ceiling, packed with boxes of varying age and condition. A central table provided space for examination, its wooden surface scarred with decades of use. "County records are organized by year and then by type," the clerk explained, moving toward the section labeled 1965, 1975. "Building permits, land transactions, county commission minutes. It's all here. Environmental studies would be separate, probably with the state archives in the Capitol." She pulled several boxes from the shelves, setting them on the table. "These contain county commission minutes and building permits for the period you mentioned. Newspaper archives are in those filing cabinets along the back wall. We have the local weekly from 1946 to present." She paused, studying him. "Will you need assistance, or—" "I can manage," the ranger assured her. "Thank you." Once alone, he began methodically working through the county commission minutes from 1968 forward. The documents were mundane, filled with discussions of road maintenance, local ordinances, and budget allocations. He skimmed them rapidly, looking for any mention of federal projects, land acquisitions, or unusual construction in the vicinity of the park. 3 hours into his search, a notation caught his attention. June 12, 1970. Request from Federal Department of Agriculture for temporary access to County Road 27 for Forest Health Research Project. Approved unanimously. The County Road 27, if he recalled correctly, had once been the main access point to what was now the eastern sector of the park, before the newer state highway had been constructed in the mid-1980s. The ranger made a note of the reference and continued searching. 2 months later, another entry appeared. August 3, 1970. Extended access request from Department of Agriculture approved. Commissioner Johnson requested clarification on nature of project. Federal representative cited national security provisions. Discussion tabled. National security provisions for a forest health research project. The ranger's pulse quickened. He quickly checked the building permits for the same period but found nothing relevant. Whatever had been constructed, it had not gone through normal county approval processes. Moving to the newspaper archives, he pulled microfilm rolls for 1970 through 1972. The local weekly, the County Chronicle, had been the only newspaper serving the area during that period. He threaded the first roll into the reader and began scanning. Most issues focused on local events, high school sports, town council meetings, births and deaths. But in the July 17, 1970 edition, a small article caught his eye. Unusual traffic puzzles locals. The piece described residents noticing increased truck traffic along County Road 27, primarily at night. When questioned, county officials had cited a federal forestry project and assured residents it was temporary. The ranger continued scanning through subsequent months. Occasional mentions of the increased traffic appeared, but nothing substantial until he reached the March 5, 1971 edition. A front-page photograph showed what appeared to be military vehicles on County Road 27. The accompanying article quoted a local resident who claimed to have seen men in hazmat suits entering the forest. Official comment from county officials simply reiterated that a federal research project was ongoing and posed no risk to residents. His search grew more focused now. The September 10, 1971 edition contained a letter to the editor from a resident expressing concern about strange sounds, like drilling or blasting, coming from the eastern forest area. The editor's note beneath it stated that the paper had sought comment from federal officials, but received only assurances that all activities were authorized and environmentally sound. Then, in the April 28, 1972 edition, nearly a year later, a small article noted that the federal project had concluded and all access restrictions to County Road 27 had been lifted. No details about the project's findings or purpose were provided. The ranger sat back, processing what he'd discovered. The timeline matched perfectly with the dates he'd seen on documents in the underground facility. Some sort of government operation, cloaked in secrecy but with at least a veneer of official authorization, had taken place in his forest precisely when the bunker would have been constructed. The Department of Agriculture had been the public face, but the invocation of national security protocols suggested something far beyond forestry research. He made photocopies of each relevant document and newspaper article, creating a chronological record of what little information existed publicly. As he was finishing, the clerk returned. "Find what you needed?" she asked, glancing at his stack of photocopies. "Some of it," he replied. "Do you recall anything about a federal project in the forest back in the early 70s? There are some references here, but not much detail." The clerk frowned thoughtfully. "Before my time here, but my father mentioned something once. There was a research station, I think, temporary building set up near what used to be the old logging camp. It was all very hush-hush. People speculated it had to do with the Cold War, maybe something nuclear." She shrugged. "It didn't last long, a year or two. Then they cleared out completely." "The old logging camp," the ranger repeated. "That would be near Blackwater Creek?" "That's right. Nothing there now but ruins. The logging operation shut down in '62, and the camp was mostly dismantled. The research people just used the access road, I believe, built their own facilities." The ranger thanked her, gathered his materials, and headed for his truck. Blackwater Creek was approximately 5 miles from where he'd discovered the bunker entrance, close enough to be connected, far enough to provide separation. If temporary surface structures had existed there, they might provide additional context for the underground facility. The former logging camp was not within park boundaries, which explained why it wasn't part of his regular patrol area. Located on what was now private timber company land, it was accessible via a deteriorating dirt road that branched off from the old County Road 27. The ranger navigated carefully, his truck bouncing over ruts and washouts that spoke of years of neglect. The camp itself was little more than a ghost town. Concrete foundations, partially reclaimed by vegetation, marked where buildings had once stood. A collapsing wooden structure, perhaps once an equipment shed, listed dangerously to one side. Metal barrels, rusted through, lay scattered among the undergrowth. But at the far edge of the clearing, something caught his attention. A concrete structure, more substantial than the logging camp buildings, stood partially hidden among the trees. Unlike the camp ruins, this structure appeared purpose-built and more recent. The ranger approached cautiously, camera ready. The building was approximately 30 feet square, constructed of reinforced concrete with no windows and a single metal door, now hanging open on rusted hinges. A faded sign still clung to the wall beside the door. USDA Forest Research Station 17A, authorized personnel only. Inside, the space was mostly empty. Metal shelving units, similar to those in the underground bunker, stood against the walls, now bare of whatever they had once held. A large rectangular depression in the floor suggested heavy equipment had once been mounted there. Electrical conduits ran along the ceiling, terminating at empty junction boxes. The ranger photographed everything methodically, noting similarities in construction between this building and the underground facility. This had been no ordinary forest research station. Rather, it appeared to have served as a surface support structure, perhaps concealing the initial excavation and construction of the bunker 5 miles away. Against the back wall, a metal desk remained, its drawers hanging open and empty. But as the ranger examined it more closely, he noticed something wedged behind it. Moving the desk with effort, He revealed a metal trash can that had been concealed in the gap between furniture and wall. Inside the can were the remains of burned documents, most reduced to ash. But at the bottom, partially protected from the fire, several fragments remained legible. The ranger carefully extracted these, laying them on the desk for examination. Most were too damaged to read, but one fragment contained a partial letterhead, Department of Defense, Project Emerald Canopy. Another showed what appeared to be a classification marking, Top Secret, Indigo Clearance Required, Department of Defense, not Agriculture, and Project Emerald Canopy, a name that suggested something far beyond forest health research. The ranger photographed the fragments in situ, then carefully collected them in a plastic evidence bag from his pack. As he exited the building, a glint of metal among the surrounding trees caught his eye. Investigating, he discovered a series of concrete posts set in a perimeter around the clearing, approximately 100 yards from the central building. At regular intervals, mounting brackets suggested security cameras or sensors had once been installed. This hadn't just been a research station, it had been a secured facility with active monitoring. The ranger checked his watch. Nearly 4 p.m. He needed to return to his station, organize his findings, and prepare for tomorrow's return to the underground bunker. The historical connection was now clear. A classified Department of Defense operation, disguised as agricultural research, had established an underground facility in the early 1970s, operated it for approximately 2 years, then abandoned it suddenly, but carefully concealed its existence rather than demolishing it. Whatever Project Emerald Canopy had involved, it had been significant enough to warrant extensive secrecy and security, and somehow, after 50 years, it remained hidden, until now. The pre-dawn forest was silent as the ranger approached the concealed bunker entrance for the second time. He'd arrived under cover of darkness, parking his personal vehicle nearly a mile away and hiking in with full equipment. If Supervisor Matthews had deliberately suppressed his report, the ranger's return might be considered unauthorized, career-ending potentially, but necessary. His pack contained everything he might need: protective gear from the station's hazardous materials kit, a professional-grade camera with extra batteries, sample containers, a portable hard drive for backup, and the station's tablet with GPS mapping capabilities. He'd also brought food and water sufficient for a full day underground, a more powerful flashlight, and a small crowbar that might prove useful for accessing locked cabinets or doors. The hatch mechanism operated as before, lifting silently despite decades of disuse. The ranger donned protective gloves and a respirator mask before descending the ladder into darkness. At the bottom, he oriented himself quickly, recalling the layout from his previous visit. This time, instead of trying to squeeze through the ventilation grate, he examined the keypad beside the sealed door more carefully. The technology was outdated but apparently still functional, given the glowing red light. On a hunch, the ranger shone his flashlight obliquely across the keypad, revealing smudges on certain buttons where oils from fingers had been deposited and never cleaned. 4, 7, 9, 0, and 2 showed the most pronounced wear patterns. A 5-digit code, most likely. The ranger considered the possibilities. Without knowing the specific combination, he had perhaps 3 attempts before a security system might lock down completely, if such systems were still active after 50 years. He thought about what he knew of the facility. Project Emerald Canopy, early 1970s, Department of Defense. On a hunch, he tried 47902. Nothing happened. He tried a different arrangement, 90274. Again, nothing. 1 attempt remaining. The ranger stepped back, thinking more carefully. Projects of this era often used date codes for security. If the project had been established in 1970 and operational until 1972, perhaps. He tried one more combination, 70472, July 4th, 1972, American Independence Day of the final operational year. A faint click, followed by the whir of ancient servo motors. The heavy door began to slide sideways into a recessed pocket in the wall. Beyond lay a corridor much wider than the one he'd already explored, illuminated by emergency lighting that cast everything in a dim green glow. The ranger documented the door mechanism with his camera before proceeding. This corridor extended approximately 100 feet before opening into a large chamber that appeared to be the true heart of the facility. Unlike the areas he'd seen previously, this space showed signs of significant technological investment. Massive computer banks lined the walls, their displays dark, but status lights still blinking on some units. Workstations were arranged in a circular pattern around a central platform that contained what appeared to be a three-dimensional mapping system. Moving carefully to avoid disturbing anything, the ranger photographed the entire chamber from multiple angles. Labels on various equipment components bore the insignia of the Department of Defense, along with project classification markings. One monitor still displayed a login screen, the cursor blinking patiently after 50 years of waiting. Beyond this main chamber, the facility branched into multiple specialized areas. The first appeared to be living quarters, more extensive than he'd initially discovered. Not just sleeping spaces, but a full cafeteria, recreation room, and what looked like a medical clinic. The scale suggested a permanent staff of at least 20 people. The second branch led to what was clearly a laboratory complex. Multiple rooms contained specialized equipment, much of it unfamiliar to the ranger. One space was dominated by what appeared to be environmental chambers, sealed glass enclosures with controlled atmospheres, now empty, but once perhaps containing plant or animal specimens. Another room held equipment labeled genetic sequencing and DNA extraction, technologies that would have been cutting edge in the early 1970s. The third branch descended deeper via a spiral staircase that led to a sub-level approximately 30 feet below the main facility. At the bottom, the ranger found himself facing another security door, this one bearing multiple warning symbols, biohazard, radiation, and a third he didn't recognize, a stylized tree within a hexagon. This door had no keypad. Instead, a small scanner was mounted beside it, likely for identification cards or biological metrics. Without the proper credentials, there would be no accessing whatever lay beyond. The ranger documented the door thoroughly, then returned to the main level to continue his exploration. In the laboratory area, one room appeared to have served as a document center. Filing cabinets lined the walls, many still filled with papers. The ranger began systematically photographing these documents, focusing on anything that might explain the facility's purpose. Most were technical reports filled with specialized terminology and data he couldn't interpret, but the introductory sections often contained more accessible summaries. One report, dated February 1971, began, "Project Emerald Canopy continues to demonstrate promising results in accelerated adaptation of conifer species to chemical and biological stressors. Specimens exposed to compound X27 show 83% higher survival rates when subsequently challenged with defoliant agents similar to those deployed in Southeast Asia operations." Another from November 1971 stated, "Genetic isolation of resistance factors now complete. Transfer to unrelated species has been demonstrated in controlled conditions. Field testing authorized per DoD Directive 7729B. The implications were becoming clear. This facility had been developing plants resistant to chemical weapons, perhaps in response to the use of defoliants like Agent Orange in Vietnam. But why locate such research in a remote forest? And why maintain such extraordinary secrecy for a defensive project?" A third document provided a potential answer. Dated March 1972, Phase 2 trials indicate successful adaptation of resistance factors to agricultural species. Wheat and corn variants show complete immunity to targeted biological agents while maintaining 92% of standard yield. Defensive applications against Soviet agricultural warfare scenarios now viable. The Cold War context emerged. This hadn't been merely about defending against known chemical weapons, but preparing for biological warfare targeting the American food supply. The facility had been developing plants resistant to potential Soviet biological weapons, or perhaps more disturbingly, creating the very biological agents that might be used against American crops in order to develop countermeasures. As the ranger continued exploring, he found something unexpected in what appeared to be a security office adjacent to the main chamber. A modern electronic device, small and black, attached to one of the ancient computer terminals. This was no 1970s technology. It was a current-generation data extraction system designed to pull information from legacy equipment. Someone had been here recently, very recently. The device was powered by a battery pack that showed a full charge. Whoever had placed it might return at any time to retrieve the extracted data. The ranger photographed the device from multiple angles without touching it, then backed away carefully. His discovery had just become significantly more complicated. The abandoned Cold War facility wasn't as abandoned as it appeared. Someone, some organization, was actively retrieving data from the old systems. operating covertly and without authorization from the Park Service. This explained Supervisor Matthews's suspicious response. Either he knew about the current operation and was deliberately obstructing investigation, or someone had intervened after the Ranger's report, instructing Matthews to take no action. Moving with greater caution now, aware that he might not be alone in the facility, the Ranger continued his documentation. In a room that appeared to have been the project director's office, he found a safe built into the wall behind a hinged panel. Unlike the electronic systems, this was mechanical, a combination dial lock that would have remained functional regardless of power supply. Using the small crowbar from his pack, the Ranger carefully pried at the edges of the safe door, not attempting to open it but looking for any sign of recent tampering. The dust pattern around the dial suggested it had been recently manipulated. Someone had either opened the safe or attempted to do so. A sound from the corridor outside the office froze him in place, a metallic clang, followed by footsteps. Someone else was in the facility. The Ranger quickly killed his flashlight, relying on the dim emergency lighting that still functioned. He moved silently behind the office door, listening intently as the footsteps approached. 2 people, he judged from the sound pattern. Male voices, speaking in hushed tones too quiet to discern words clearly. Professional, methodical movements, not the cautious exploration of curious trespassers, but the confident actions of people who knew exactly what they were doing and where they were going. The Ranger remained motionless as the footsteps passed the office door and continued down the corridor toward the laboratory section. Once certain they were out of earshot, he moved to the office's second door, which opened onto a parallel corridor. He needed to exit immediately. His solo exploration had just become too dangerous to continue. Moving with practiced silence, the Ranger navigated back toward the entrance ladder, careful to avoid the main corridors where the intruders might be working. He transferred all his photos to the portable hard drive, then duplicated them to the tablet, redundant copies of everything he'd discovered in case one device was compromised. At the base of the entrance ladder, he paused to listen once more. No sounds of pursuit, but the knowledge that others were actively working in the facility changed everything. He ascended rapidly, emerging into the forest light with a profound sense of relief. The Ranger secured the hatch exactly as he'd found it, then moved away quickly, taking an indirect route back to his vehicle. His mind raced with implications. The Cold War research was disturbing enough, developing biological countermeasures, perhaps weaponized plant strains, but the modern intrusion suggested the old research still held value to someone. Military, intelligence agencies, private interests, he couldn't be certain, but the covert nature of their operation suggested this was an official government reclamation of classified material. This was something unauthorized. One thing was clear: returning to Supervisor Matthews would be pointless. Whatever was happening, it extended beyond local Park Service authority. The Ranger needed to find another channel, someone who couldn't be easily silenced or bought off. The Ranger's station appeared untouched when he returned late that afternoon. Everything was exactly as he'd left it, too exactly perhaps. The subtle markers he routinely employed, a pencil balanced on the edge of his desk, a drawer left open precisely 1 inch, remained undisturbed, suggesting no one had entered during his absence. That in itself was suspicious. After his report to regional headquarters, someone should have come to collect his initial documentation and photographs. He uploaded his new findings to his personal encrypted cloud storage before removing all traces of the investigation from official devices. As he was finishing, his radio crackled to life. "Eastern Station, this is dispatch. Status check, over." The Ranger responded calmly, giving no indication of his activities. "Eastern Station secure. Routine patrol completed. No incidents to report. Acknowledged. Be advised, visitors reported to your sector tomorrow. Environmental research team with proper clearances. Provide standard assistance if encountered." Environmental research team. There were no scheduled scientific visits in his records, and all research activities required advance notification to station rangers. "Understood," he replied, keeping his voice neutral. "Any details on their research parameters?" "Negative. Documentation indicates soil sampling only. Standard protocol." The Ranger acknowledged and signed off, unease growing. This sudden research team arriving immediately after his discovery and report couldn't be coincidence. Someone was moving quickly to establish a presence in the area, perhaps to monitor the bunker or to create a cover story for any unusual activity that might be noticed. As darkness fell, He prepared for the night watch, the routine paperwork and hourly radio checks that structured his evening shifts. But as he moved toward the coffee maker in the station's small kitchen area, something on the counter caught his eye. A folded piece of paper that definitely hadn't been there when he'd left that morning. Heart pounding, he unfolded it carefully. The message was brief, typed in a standard font without signature. Initial discovery noted. Further investigation inadvisable. Career and pension considerations suggested. A threat, thinly veiled as professional advice. Someone had entered his station while he was gone, despite the undisturbed markers, which meant they knew his security habits and had deliberately maintained them to create the illusion that no one had entered. The ranger photographed the note before carefully returning it to exactly where he'd found it. Then, methodically, he began checking his station for any other signs of intrusion. In his sleeping quarters, nothing appeared disturbed, but when he checked his personal laptop, he found it positioned differently than he'd left it. The air vent now faced the wall rather than outward. Opening it revealed no obvious signs of tampering, but he couldn't be certain it hadn't been compromised. In the equipment storage area, everything seemed in order until he checked his field pack. The emergency satellite phone, standard issue for rangers in remote stations, was missing, replaced with an identical unit. The ranger examined this replacement carefully, noting slight differences in wear patterns. His original device had a small scratch near the antenna. This one was pristine. A tracking device, perhaps, or modified to monitor communications. He left the replacement where it was, making no indication he'd noticed the switch. Whoever was watching needed to believe their surveillance remained undetected. The next morning, the ranger followed his normal routine. Breakfast, equipment check, vehicle inspection. But when he started his service truck, the engine made a subtle but distinct noise. A clicking from the left front wheel well that hadn't been present the day before. Rather than investigating immediately, which might alert watchers, he continued his morning patrol route, waiting until he reached a secluded area before pulling over to examine the vehicle. Careful inspection revealed a small tracking device magnetically attached to the truck's frame. Commercial grade, not military. The kind used by private security firms or corporate espionage operations. The ranger photographed it in place, then left it undisturbed. Better to know he was being tracked than to remove the device and alert his watchers that he'd discovered their surveillance. At the Regional Park Service office 50 miles away, the ranger arrived for what he'd described over the radio as a routine supply pickup. The administrative building bustled with typical weekday activity. Rangers coming and going, administrative staff moving between offices, maintenance crews collecting work orders. The ranger made his way to the records department, where park incident reports were processed and archived. The senior clerk wasn't at her desk, but a junior staff member, barely into his 20s with a Park Service trainee badge, looked up expectantly. "Morning," the ranger said. "I need to check on a report filed yesterday. Code 5 Alpha from Eastern Station." The young clerk frowned, typing into his computer. "I don't see anything under that code from yesterday." He looked up. "Are you sure about the classification?" "Positive. I filed it myself with Supervisor Matthews. Underground structure discovery, potential hazardous materials." The clerk's expression shifted subtly, a flicker of recognition followed by carefully constructed neutrality. "Let me check the restricted filings." He typed again, then shook his head. "Nothing there either. Maybe it hasn't been processed yet." The ranger studied the young man carefully. "How long have you worked here?" 6 months, the clerk replied. "Still learning the systems. Long enough to know that a Code 5 Alpha would be processed immediately, not sitting in someone's inbox." The clerk glanced nervously toward the door, then lowered his voice. "Look, I shouldn't be saying this, but your report came through. I saw it yesterday afternoon. Supervisor Matthews took it directly to the restricted archive himself. Then this morning all record of it was gone from the system." "Gone? Reports don't just disappear." "This one did." The clerk looked increasingly uncomfortable. "And I'm not the only one who noticed. Jenkins in security asked about it too. Said some guys came in last night, showed federal credentials, spent 2 hours in the archives." "What agency?" the ranger pressed. "I don't know. Jenkins just said they weren't Park Service or Forest Service, something else. They left with a bunch of files." The clerk hesitated. "Look, I need this job. My sister's sick and the health insurance—" "I understand," the ranger assured him. "I'm not asking you to do anything, but if you remember anything else about those visitors, or if you notice anything about that report reappearing in the system, my direct number is still the same." The clerk nodded slightly. then straightened as footsteps approached. An older woman, the senior records clerk, entered, eyeing the ranger with professional detachment. "Supply forms are ready," she said, handing him a clipboard. "Everything you requested except the radio batteries. Those are on back order." The ranger played along, signing for supplies he hadn't actually requested. As he turned to leave, the senior clerk added, "Oh, and Supervisor Matthews wants to see you before you head back to your station." Matthews's office was on the top floor, with windows overlooking the parking lot and the forest beyond. The supervisor, a heavy-set man in his late 50s with thinning gray hair and the weathered complexion of someone who'd spent decades outdoors before moving to administration, gestured for the ranger to sit. "Eastern Station," Matthews said, not using the ranger's name or rank. "Interesting report came across my desk yesterday. Hikers claiming they saw someone in a Park Service uniform entering a restricted research area. Said he was taking photographs, acting suspicious." He raised an eyebrow. "Any thoughts on that?" The ranger kept his expression neutral. "No, sir. I was conducting routine trail maintenance yesterday. Didn't encounter any hikers in my sector." "That right?" Matthews shuffled some papers on his desk. "Because I've got a vehicle tracking log that shows your truck parked for nearly 3 hours at the Blackwater Creek access road. That's not park property. That's private timberland." So they had been tracking his official vehicle even before placing the device he'd found this morning. The ranger maintained his composure. "Yes, sir. I was documenting erosion patterns where the creek crosses back into park boundaries. The unusual rainfall this season has accelerated soil loss." Matthews leaned forward. "Let me be direct. Whatever you think you found out there, it's been handled. Appropriate authorities have been notified. Your involvement is concluded. Return to your regular duties and forget about unauthorized structures, research facilities, or whatever else you imagine you discovered." He paused. 20 years of service, right? 2 more to full pension? Be ashamed to throw that away." The second threat, more explicit than the note. The ranger nodded slowly, as if accepting the implied command. "Understood, sir. I'll focus on my assigned duties." "Good." Matthews leaned back. "Oh, and turn in your personal tablet and camera for a security audit. Standard procedure after potential exposure to restricted information. They're at my station, sir. I'll bring them in tomorrow. See that you do." Matthews waved a hand in dismissal. As the ranger exited the building, a black SUV with tinted windows pulled into a reserved parking space near the entrance. 2 men in dark suits emerged, moving with the purposeful efficiency of federal agents. They entered the building without acknowledging the ranger, but he noticed one speak quietly into a wrist microphone as they passed. Back in his truck, the ranger took a circuitous route home, making several unnecessary stops to observe whether he was being followed. No obvious tail materialized, but the tracking device on his vehicle made physical surveillance unnecessary. They knew exactly where he was. At a small diner in a neighboring town, the ranger used the public computer to send a carefully worded email to an old acquaintance, a journalist who had once written an expose on corruption in federal land management. The message contained no specific details, just a request for a secure call on an encrypted line. The response came faster than expected, appearing in his personal email account just as he returned to his truck. "Location compromised. Meet Junction 17 truck stop, 9 p.m. tomorrow. Come alone. Bring everything." Junction 17 was nearly 100 miles away, well outside his patrol area. Getting there without alerting his watchers would require careful planning, and abandoning both his official vehicle and the replacement satellite phone that had been planted in his equipment. As darkness fell, the ranger returned to his station for what might be the last time. He gathered only essential items: the hard drive and tablet containing his evidence, personal identification, some cash he kept for emergencies. Everything else would have to be left behind. Before leaving, he composed a brief letter requesting emergency family leave, citing his wife's health. Standard procedure would grant such leave automatically, potentially giving him 72 hours before anyone realized he wasn't actually at his residence. He placed the letter in the outgoing mail pouch, to be collected during tomorrow's supply delivery. Outside, the forest had grown unnaturally quiet again, the same eerie silence he'd noticed the day he'd discovered the bunker. But this time, he understood its significance. He was being watched, not just electronically but physically. Someone was out there in the darkness, monitoring his movements. The ranger moved purposefully around his station, preparing for what would appear to be a normal night shift. But as he closed the blinds, he caught a glimpse of movement at the forest edge, a shadow detaching itself from a tree, moving with deliberate stealth toward the station's rear entrance. They were making their move sooner than he'd anticipated. Perhaps they'd detected his computer activity, or Matthews had reported their conversation. Either way, his window for escape was closing rapidly. The ranger checked his watch. 11:37 p.m. The night was just beginning, and somehow, he needed to evade his watchers, travel 100 miles undetected, and reach the journalist with his evidence intact. Whatever Project Emerald Canopy had involved, it remained important enough 50 years later that people were willing to threaten, surveil, and potentially worse, to keep it hidden. As he slipped out the rarely used side entrance of his station, disappearing into the forest he knew better than anyone, the ranger felt a grim determination replace his earlier uncertainty. The truth about what lay beneath his forest had remained buried for 5 decades. It was time to bring it into the light, whatever the personal cost. The ranger moved with practiced silence through the forest he knew as intimately as the lines on his own palm. 18 years of daily traversals had etched every trail, gully, and rock formation into his memory. This knowledge was his advantage now, perhaps his only one against whoever was closing in on his station. He kept to the densest undergrowth, avoiding the established trails where motion sensors might have been placed. The weight of the evidence pressed against his back, the hard drive and tablet containing hundreds of photographs, the document fragments from the abandoned research station, his handwritten notes detailing the timeline of Project Emerald Canopy. Everything he'd discovered was now compressed into a waterproof pack barely larger than a lunch container. After 30 minutes of careful movement, he reached the small emergency cache he'd established years ago, a weatherproof container hidden within a hollow log approximately 2 miles from his station. Standard ranger practice encouraged such caches. Officially, they contained emergency supplies in case of injury or extreme weather. His contained those items, but also something more valuable now: an untraceable prepaid satellite phone, purchased with cash during a vacation 3 years earlier and never activated. The ranger retrieved the phone, powering it on for the first time. No GPS chip, no connection to his name or the Park Service. If his watchers were tracking his official devices and monitoring communications networks, this would provide a channel they couldn't anticipate. He needed to move quickly. By now, whoever had been approaching his station would have discovered his absence. The emergency leave request might buy him some time, but not much. A simple call to his residence would reveal he wasn't there. Using the satellite phone, he sent a brief text message to his wife's personal email, an address not connected to any of his official contact information. The message was deliberately vague. Research project requiring immediate attention. Unreachable for 72 hours. Everything fine. Trust me. It wasn't much, but it might prevent her from filing a missing persons report if contacted by his supervisors. Next, he recorded a video on the satellite phone, speaking quietly but clearly. If you're viewing this, I've disappeared or something has happened to me. I've uncovered a classified Cold War facility beneath the eastern sector of the park. Project Emerald Canopy. Department of Defense. Biological research. Potentially weaponized plant strains. The facility has been accessed recently by unknown parties. My initial report was suppressed by regional headquarters. I've been surveilled and threatened. He detailed the locations, the evidence he'd gathered, the timeline of events since his discovery, and the threats he'd received. He named Supervisor Matthews specifically, described the federal agents he'd observed, and explained his suspicions about why a 50-year-old abandoned research project would warrant such aggressive protection. I'm attempting to deliver this evidence to a journalist. All files are backed up to the secure cloud storage under the emergency protocol we established. Password is the usual. Append your birthday. The "we" referred to his former patrol partner, now stationed in a different region, a trusted colleague who had established the secure backup system with him years ago, after they'd uncovered evidence of illegal logging that mysteriously disappeared from official channels. The ranger had maintained the cloud account ever since, though he'd never needed to use it. If I don't check in every 24 hours, the system will automatically send access credentials to the following individuals. He listed 3 names: his former patrol partner, a retired federal prosecutor he'd worked with on a poaching case, and a university researcher who specialized in biological warfare history. People beyond the immediate reach of whoever was suppressing this information. After uploading both the video and all his evidence files to the secure cloud storage, the ranger checked his watch. 12:42 a.m. He needed to move quickly but cautiously. Junction 17 was approximately 100 miles southwest. A 6-hour journey on foot through the forest to the nearest small town where he might acquire transportation without being immediately identified. Before leaving the cache site, he prepared one final safeguard. Using the satellite phone, he composed an email scheduled to send automatically in 48 hours to the same journalist he planned to meet, containing coordinates for the bunker entrance, the abandoned research station, and a digital copy of his evidence. If he failed to reach Junction 17, the truth would still emerge. The ranger took a moment to center himself. 18 years of service, of protecting this forest and upholding his oath, had led to this moment. Abandoning his post, evading his superiors, exposing a classified project that powerful interests clearly wanted to remain hidden. The weight of that decision settled on him, not regret, but recognition of its significance. From his pack, he removed his service badge, running his thumb over the worn metal one last time. Then he tucked it securely into a waterproof pouch and placed it deep within the cache. He wouldn't carry any official identification that might be traceable. The ranger pulled a paper map from the cache. No digital trail, no GPS that could be monitored. The route he'd chosen would take him through the most rugged and rarely patrolled sections of the park, eventually intersecting with a little-used fire road where, if luck was with him, he might be able to flag down a seasonal worker or maintenance vehicle. With one final survey of his surroundings, alert for any sign of pursuit, the ranger shouldered his pack and vanished into the darkness of the forest, moving with the silent efficiency that had made him legendary among newer rangers. The night creatures barely registered his passage, just another shadow moving among shadows, heading southwest through terrain few humans ever traversed. Behind him, the faint glow of flashlights had begun to appear near his station, expanding outward in a search pattern. They were looking for him now, but they were starting in the wrong place, following standard search protocols. The ranger allowed himself a grim smile. Those protocols existed because most people lost in the forest followed predictable patterns. He was counting on his pursuers, not realizing that the person who had written many of those protocols knew exactly how to subvert them. By dawn, he would be miles away, having crossed terrain impassable to vehicles. From there, it would become a different kind of challenge, moving through populated areas without being identified. But first, the forest, his domain, his advantage. 6 hours of continuous hiking through dense undergrowth had left the ranger physically drained but mentally alert, his senses heightened by the constant need for vigilance. As the first gray light of dawn filtered through the canopy, he reached the perimeter of the park's eastern boundary, where the national forest transitioned to a patchwork of timber company land and small private holdings. The fire road was less than half a mile ahead, according to his paper map. If his timing was right, maintenance crews might be starting their morning routes, offering a chance for transportation that wouldn't immediately trigger alerts on transportation networks. But as the ranger crested a small rise overlooking what should have been his exit route, he froze. The fire road was blocked by 2 black SUVs identical to the one he'd seen at regional headquarters. 4 men in dark clothing stood in a loose perimeter, scanning the forest edge methodically. They had anticipated his route, or at least guessed it with enough confidence to establish a checkpoint. The ranger eased back into cover, considering his options. He could attempt to circle around, find another exit point, but that would cost precious hours, time he wasn't certain he had. As he weighed alternatives, a realization struck him. The bunker. If they were allocating resources to intercept him here, the underground facility might be temporarily understaffed, and there was still one chamber he hadn't accessed, the secured sublevel behind the biometric scanner. Whatever lay behind that door might contain the most critical evidence, the final piece that would make his case irrefutable. It was a desperate gamble, but the ranger had always trusted his instincts. He altered course, heading northeast toward the concealed entrance he'd discovered 3 days earlier. Moving during daylight increased his risk of detection, but he kept to areas of dense undergrowth, utilizing terrain features that would shield him from aerial observation. By mid-morning, he approached the rectangular pattern of younger trees that marked the bunker location. From his concealed position, he conducted a careful survey of the area. No vehicles visible, no obvious signs of surveillance equipment. But that meant little. Modern monitoring devices could be nearly invisible in forest settings. The ranger waited, observing for a full 30 minutes, noting bird movements and wildlife patterns that might indicate human presence. Satisfied that no immediate threat was present, he advanced to the hatch location with measured steps, alert for tripwires or pressure sensors that might have been installed since his last visit. The hatch mechanism functioned as before, rising silently to reveal the access shaft below. The ranger descended cautiously, every sense straining for any indication that the facility was currently occupied. At the bottom, he paused, listening intently. The corridors were silent, the only sound the faint electrical hum of ancient systems still functioning after decades of abandonment. Moving with heightened caution, the ranger navigated directly to the spiral staircase leading to the sub-level where the secured door with the biometric scanner was located. His plan was simple but risky. Document whatever lay beyond that door, if possible, then exit through one of the emergency evacuation routes he'd noted on facility maps during his previous exploration. At the security door, he examined the scanner more carefully. It appeared designed for keycards rather than biometric identification as he'd initially assumed, an older system consistent with early 1970s technology. The card reader slot was narrow, designed for a magnetic stripe. The ranger retrieved the document fragments he'd collected from the abandoned research station. Among them was a laminated piece that might have been part of an identification card. On a hunch, he tried inserting the fragment into the reader slot. Nothing happened. Of course, it wouldn't be that simple. He stepped back, considering alternatives. Force wasn't an option. The door was clearly reinforced steel. But security systems, especially older ones, often had emergency overrides, maintenance accesses that bypassed normal authentication. The ranger examined the door frame carefully, running his fingers along the seams where metal met concrete. Near the floor, he felt a slight inconsistency, a panel that gave slightly under pressure. Kneeling, he applied steady force until the panel popped open, revealing a manual keyhole. This was standard for facilities of the era. Electronic security with mechanical backup in case of power failure. The keyhole would accept a specific maintenance key, likely kept only by senior personnel. A key he didn't have, but 18 years of park service had taught the ranger to improvise. From his pack, he retrieved his multi-tool, selecting the tension wrench and hook pick attachments. Basic lockpicking was part of emergency training for rangers who might need to access locked facilities during search and rescue operations. The lock was old but precision-made. After several tense minutes of careful manipulation, he felt the final pin set, and the mechanism turned with a solid click. A hydraulic hiss followed as pressure equalized, and the heavy door began to swing inward automatically. Beyond lay darkness, deeper and more complete than any other section of the facility. The ranger activated his flashlight, the beam cutting through blackness to reveal a sight that momentarily stole his breath. The sub-level chamber was massive, at least 50 feet square, with a ceiling that rose 20 feet above. But it wasn't the size that caused his pulse to quicken. It was what the space contained. Row upon row of glass cultivation chambers filled the room, each connected to sophisticated life support systems that hummed with active power. Within these chambers grew plants, but unlike any the ranger had ever encountered in his decades of forest management. The specimens displayed impossible characteristics. Foliage in metallic hues, structural components that appeared more mechanical than organic, root systems that interfaced directly with electronic monitoring equipment. Some chambers contained what appeared to be conventional agricultural species, corn, wheat, potatoes, but with visible modifications that rendered them alien and unsettling. Central to the room stood a larger containment unit, its walls consisting of multiple layers of reinforced glass separated by vacuum chambers. Inside this central unit grew what appeared to be a tree, approximately 15 feet tall, with silver-blue foliage and bark that seemed to pulse with bioluminescent patterns. Integrated into its trunk were what looked like mechanical components, sensors, data ports, and distribution systems that fed directly into the organism's vascular structure. The implications were staggering. This wasn't merely Cold War-era experimentation with chemical resistance. This was advanced bioengineering, decades ahead of what should have been possible in the early 1970s. And the systems were active, maintaining these specimens in suspended animation for half a century. More disturbing were the implications of recent activity. Modern monitoring equipment had been installed alongside the original systems, cutting-edge technology gathering data from these impossible specimens. Someone wasn't just accessing old research, they were continuing it. The ranger documented everything methodically, his camera capturing high-resolution images from multiple angles. He downloaded facility data onto his tablet from an active terminal, copying what appeared to be research logs and experimental protocols, without attempting to understand the specialized content. The evidence was what mattered. irrefutable proof that something extraordinary had been developed here, something that defied conventional understanding of both biology and technology from that era. As he worked, a sound from the stairwell froze him in place. Voices, at least two individuals, descending toward the sublevel. His examination had taken longer than intended. Someone had returned to the facility. The ranger quickly scanned the chamber for alternatives to the main entrance. Near the back wall, a small red sign indicated an emergency evacuation route. He moved toward it rapidly but silently, discovering a narrow corridor that led to what appeared to be a service shaft with ladder rungs embedded in the wall. The voices grew louder as he entered the shaft, beginning his ascent. Unlike the main entrance, this route appeared to have been unused for decades, the metal rungs coated with dust that now clung to his gloves. The shaft extended upward at least 100 feet, a direct route to the surface that would bypass the main facility entirely. As he climbed, a voice echoed from below, now inside the sub-level chamber. "Someone's been here. The terminal's active. Male, authoritative, tense with urgency. Full security sweep now, and check the surveillance footage from the upper entrance." The ranger increased his pace, ignoring the burning in his shoulders and forearms as he ascended rapidly. Near the top, he encountered a simple hatch mechanism, a push plate that yielded under steady pressure. The hatch swung upward, and fresh air rushed into the shaft as he emerged into daylight. This exit was well concealed, emerging among a cluster of large boulders approximately a quarter mile from the main entrance. The ranger quickly secured the hatch, which automatically settled back into position, becoming nearly invisible among the rock formations. He had only moments before his presence would be confirmed by the facility's internal systems. Moving with controlled urgency, he began making his way southwest, no longer following established trails, but cutting directly through the most challenging terrain, areas where dense undergrowth and steep inclines would hamper vehicular pursuit and provide maximum cover from aerial observation. After 20 minutes of rapid movement, he heard it, the distinctive sound of helicopter rotors, faint at first but growing steadily louder. Aerial search, exactly as he'd feared. The ranger ducked beneath a rocky overhang, using his knowledge of terrain to identify a location that would shield him from infrared detection. The helicopter passed overhead, circling in an expanding pattern centered on the facility. Standard search protocol, but executed with resources far beyond what the Park Service could normally deploy. This confirmed his suspicions that, whatever Project Emerald Canopy involved, it warranted high-level attention even 50 years after its apparent abandonment. For the next 4 hours, the ranger employed every evasion technique he'd mastered in nearly 2 decades of wilderness work. He utilized stream beds to mask his trail, doubled back along rocky outcroppings that wouldn't hold footprints, and kept to areas of dense canopy that would complicate aerial observation. His heart pounded steadily in his chest, his breathing controlled despite the exertion. Each sense was heightened to painful acuity, every snapped twig potentially revealing an approaching pursuer, every distant sound possibly signaling mechanized search efforts. By mid-afternoon, he had covered nearly 15 miles of difficult terrain, approaching the western boundary of the park. The helicopter had departed, but the ranger remained vigilant for ground searchers. As he crested a ridge overlooking the valley that separated the park from the nearest highway, he paused to survey the landscape below. A roadblock had been established at the main park exit, with multiple vehicles bearing official markings: Park Service, County Sheriff, and unmarked SUVs that likely housed federal agents. They were casting a wide net, anticipating that he would attempt to leave the park by conventional routes, but the ranger had no intention of using established exits. Half a mile south of the roadblock lay an old maintenance culvert that ran beneath the highway, designed to prevent seasonal flooding from washing out the road. It wasn't on current maps. The drainage system had been rerouted during a highway expansion 15 years earlier, but the original culvert remained, forgotten by all but the longest-serving park employees. The descent to the valley floor required careful navigation of a near-vertical slope. The ranger used tree roots and rock formations as handholds, controlling his descent despite exhaustion beginning to set in after nearly 24 hours without rest. At the bottom, he allowed himself 30 seconds to catch his breath before continuing toward the culvert location. The concrete tube was partially obscured by vegetation, its entrance hidden from casual observation. The ranger verified it was clear of wildlife before entering, crawling through the confined space with his waterproof pack held before him. 50 yards of uncomfortable progression through darkness led to the opposite end, where afternoon light filtered through overgrown vegetation. Emerging cautiously, the ranger found himself on the far side of the highway, hidden from view by a dense thicket of brambles. A half-mile walk through woods parallel to the road would bring him to a truck stop. Not Junction 17, his original destination, but a smaller facility used primarily by local logging operations. By the time he reached the truck stop's perimeter, dusk was approaching. The ranger paused at the forest edge, observing the parking lot for any signs of surveillance. The facility appeared normal. A few long-haul trucks, several logging vehicles, the usual assortment of pickup trucks and SUVs common to the region. He had no cash, no identification, and was dressed in hiking clothes now soiled from his cross-country journey. Direct approach risked immediate attention. Instead, he circled to the loading area behind the main building, where a delivery truck was being unloaded by two workers. Timing his movement carefully, the ranger slipped aboard the emptied truck as the workers stepped inside with a dolly. The truck's destination marker indicated it was headed south. Not ideal, but movement in any direction away from the search area improved his chances. As the truck pulled away from the stop 30 minutes later, the ranger concealed himself among empty packaging materials, allowing exhaustion to finally overtake him in brief, restless periods of sleep as the vehicle carried him steadily southward, away from the forest that had been his home and responsibility for 18 years. 12 hours and 3 separate hitchhiked rides later, the ranger arrived at Junction 17 truck stop. The massive facility operated 24 hours, serving interstate traffic with restaurants, shower facilities, and a small motel attached to the main complex. His appearance had drawn curious glances from the drivers who'd given him rides, but none had asked questions beyond his destination. It was 9:17 p.m., 17 minutes past the arranged meeting time. The ranger approached cautiously, scanning the facility from the cover of trees along the property edge. The sprawling parking lot was filled with vehicles of all descriptions, the building's fluorescent lights creating pools of harsh illumination against the night. He identified 3 possible surveillance positions with clear views of the main entrance and noted 2 vehicles that matched the profile of those he'd seen at the roadblock, unmarked SUVs with government-issue tire patterns. They had anticipated this meeting point. The ranger retreated from the edge, considering alternatives. The journalist would be inside waiting, but entering through the main doors would expose him immediately to potential observation. He needed another approach. The motel section offered a solution. Connected to the main building but with separate external access to each room, it provided multiple entry points. The ranger circled the property, approaching from the rear where delivery vehicles were parked near service doors. A maintenance worker was finishing a cigarette break near one of these doors. The ranger waited until the man moved back inside, then slipped through before the door locked. Inside, he found himself in a service corridor that connected to the main building. Using a handwritten note passed to a waitress bussing tables in the main restaurant. "Tell the man in the blue jacket with the laptop that his package will be in room 117. The ranger established contact with the journalist without exposing himself in the main public areas. 20 minutes later, a knock at the motel room door. The ranger checked through the peephole, confirming the visitor matched the journalist's description. Mid-50s, graying beard, carrying a laptop case. "You're the ranger?" the journalist asked after the door closed behind him. "Yes. You look like you've been through hell. I've been evading pursuit for approximately 36 hours, the ranger replied. "The situation is more serious than I initially indicated." Without preamble, the ranger transferred copies of his evidence to the journalist's secured devices, the photographs, facility documents, video documentation, and his detailed timeline of events since the discovery. The journalist's expression shifted as he reviewed the material, professional skepticism giving way to stunned disbelief. He paused, searching for words. "This is beyond anything I've encountered in 30 years of investigative work. You're certain this is authentic? These plants, these systems, they shouldn't have been possible in the 70s. Everything is documented with GPS data, timestamps, and multiple authentication methods," the ranger confirmed. "I've included original documents bearing Department of Defense classifications. The facility is active now. Someone has resumed the research, using modern technology to interface with the original specimens. Why come to me instead of federal authorities?" The ranger explained the response from his supervisors, the surveillance, the threats, and the coordinated effort to intercept him. all suggesting involvement at high levels. I need this distributed broadly and immediately, he concluded. Multiple media outlets, academic researchers, appropriate oversight committees in Congress, too widely disseminated to be effectively suppressed. The journalist nodded, already working on his laptop. I have secure connections to 3 major news organizations and several international outlets. Once this goes live in multiple jurisdictions simultaneously, the story becomes impossible to contain. He looked up. You understand what this means for you? Best case, end of your career. Worst case? I understand, the ranger replied. The public deserves to know what's been hidden beneath protected land for 5 decades, and whatever is being done with those specimens now needs immediate scrutiny.